Today on the newscast, the Iranian regime reveals its strategy for a future war with Israel as it gears up for a massive attack drone drill this week. Get all the breaking details next. Hey folks, Eric Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast. If you watch us on a regular basis, you are very well aware of the ring of fire that surrounds Israel right now. An Iranian-backed ring of fire, including Iran's proxies, surrounding Israel on all sides and armed to the teeth with ballistic missiles, rockets, and attack drones. This ring of fire includes Hezbollah, of course, to Israel's north, Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas to Israel's southwest in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen to the deep south of Israel, and those various Iranian-backed Shia militias to Israel's east in Syria and in Iraq. Add it all up, folks, and they are in possession of hundreds of thousands of rockets and missiles and an untold number of attack drones. Hezbollah itself wields at least 150,000 rockets and missiles, and many of those missiles are increasingly precision-guided. One day, when Israel is forced to face off against this ring of fire, I call it the Great Northern War because I believe that the bulk of the action will be in the north, where Israel is forced to face off against Hezbollah and the Iranian regime in Lebanon and in Syria. But Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, those Shia militias will certainly throw their hats in the ring as well and get involved in an attempt to drag Israel into a multi-front war. Well, the head of Iran's elite Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps confirmed this over the weekend. This is indeed Iran's plan in a future war with Israel. We're going to break it down in a minute. Before I do, I just want to encourage you to subscribe to the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. Hey, we're coming to you every day, Monday through Friday, and sometimes on the weekend, depending on the news cycle. We are fast approaching 500,000 subscribers. Hard to believe, and we would love you on board to join us shoulder to shoulder for such a time as this as watchmen and women on the wall. Hey, let's break it down. The head of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, or IRGC for short, his name is Hossein Salami. Yes, his last name is Salami, and he sat with recently an Iranian interviewer. This was reported in Fars News, F-A-R-S, which is close to the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. And then the Jerusalem Post over the weekend, Seth Frantzman, an excellent reporter there, really broke this down in stunning fashion. Not surprising, but still stunning in terms of the openness of Hossein Salami in offering, yes, this is our plan. And here's the way it went. Number one, the Ring of Fire, the multi-front war. Salami confirmed, yes, this is the plan. And what he said was, look, incidents or flare-ups like we saw earlier this month when Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Israel went toe-to-toe for 3 days. We reported on that extensively here in the newscast. Salami said we want to keep up with these flare-ups. Think of last May 2021 when Hamas and Israel fought a war for about 11 days and Hamas fired at least 4,500 rockets at Israel. He said we want to continue that. The consistent flare-ups which will harass Israel. It allows Iran to probe for any weaknesses in Israel's defenses, and of course, it allows Iran to buy time as it, number one, drives for nuclear weapons. More on that in a minute. Number two, builds up its own ballistic missile stockpile. And number three, arms Hezbollah to lengths that have been not seen so far by Israel in terms of countering Iran's proxies to make Hezbollah the most lethal Iranian proxy. Hey, right now, the 150,000 rockets and missiles, a army, basically a standing terror army of some 40,000 trained foot soldiers. Hezbollah is one of the most powerful fighting forces in the entire Middle East. This is a terrorist militia, and Iran wants to continue to build them up and build them up until the time is right to unleash Hezbollah, and then you will have that multi-front war. Hossein Salami also said that the goal for Iran going forward is to unite all of the various Palestinian factions. No surprise there. He made repeated points during this interview that Palestinian Islamic Jihad is the tip of the spear for Iran. Now, of course, Hamas is also an Iranian proxy in Gaza alongside Islamic Jihad, but Islamic Jihad is completely beholden to the Iranian regime. Hamas tries to at least have some independence, but Islamic Jihad is completely, again, a pawn of Iran. And what Salami says is, look, if Islamic Jihad kicks things off and starts the fighting with Israel, no doubt Hamas and the other factions like Fatah, the PFLP, the other Palestinian terror factions, they will get involved as well. Iran is banking on that in a future conflict. Also, I just took some notes here too, just to break it down for you. Ground forces. Hossein Salami, again, he's the head of Iran's elite Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. He said that, look, we have the massive rocket and missile stockpiles, the drones, but ultimately we cannot overrun the hated Zionist entity. We call it the land of Israel, what God calls it. We can't do that without ground forces. So he talked about waves of civilians, not only military forces, which he mentioned on the ground, but waves of civilians. And folks, I believe that he envisions a Palestinian uprising, essentially, coming from Gaza, coming from the West Bank, which we call the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria. We saw an inkling of this last May when in the Arab towns in Israel proper, there were uprisings. There was violence against Jews in those towns, committed by Arabs in those towns. And I believe that the Iranian regime wants to stir that up in a major way in Gaza and in the Palestinian areas in the West Bank. Salami specifically mentioned the West Bank and the city of Jenin, which is an Islamic Jihad stronghold in many ways, as a place where Iran and Hamas, Islamic Jihad, want to bolster their ranks. So he sees not only missiles, rockets, and drones flying, he sees civilians on foot getting involved. I mean, I think back to Gaza over the past few years, 2018, 2019, where we had thousands upon thousands of Palestinians basically storming the Gaza-Israel border and confronting IDF troops. And certainly Iran would like to stir that up on all of Israel's borders. So he's got an eye on the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria as well. That is the big plan. And of course, he mentioned again, ground military forces. Hezbollah, Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, has talked about incursions, ground incursions into Israel. I don't think you'll see a land invasion by Iran and its proxies. I believe there will be an attempt at that in a future war called the War of Gog and Magog, which is laid out in the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39. We've talked about that many times here in the newscast. That's a larger war, but this great northern war I'm referencing will come before that, I believe, involving Iran and its proxies. So now you know, and it shouldn't be a big surprise if you watch a newscast on a regular basis, you knew that Iran was pushing towards a multi-front war. Again, I call it the Ring of Fire. Hossein Salami confirms this. And hey, the Iranian regime is nothing if not patient. They are very, very patient. They will be content to have more flare-ups with Israel involving Hamas and Islamic Jihad over the next several years, if it takes that, until Hezbollah is in a place where Iran feels comfortable with unleashing it. Also, Salami mentioned that he believes Israel's defenses are not insurmountable despite Iron Dome, despite the development of Israel's Iron Beam laser defense system. And he believes that Israel is vulnerable, or the Israeli public is vulnerable to psyops or psychological operations. I'm not so sure about that. But there you have it, from the horse's mouth, so to speak, the Iranian blueprint, the Iranian strategy. Now, one central pillar of that, and by the way, God Almighty still sits on the throne. The God of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Israel is very prepared for these future conflicts. They know what's coming, the Israel Defense Forces and Israel's leadership. Folks, I've been on the ground with the IDF for live fire drills all along that northern border. They are prepared. They have been prepared for years. And it is a seasoned fighting force, is the IDF. So they're ready for what's coming. It's going to be nasty, and deadly on many levels. It's tough to even think about or wrap your head around it, but the IDF will be prepared, and the God of Israel, most importantly, is very prepared to deal with Israel's enemies. So take heart. And folks, one last note before we go. The Iranian regime's drone program, as we reported on the newscast last week, is growing by leaps and bounds, and you can bet that it will be a major component of any future Iranian war against Israel. Well, the Iranian regime announced today that on Wednesday, August 24th, it will be holding a massive drone drill that will really cover all of Iran, from the Gulf of Oman and the Persian Gulf up to northern Iran and the plains. And according to an Iranian official, it will involve at least 150 Iranian attack drones, presumably of all shapes and sizes. And what this is, folks, is yet another example of the Iranian regime flexing its muscle to the world. Now, last week, we reported here in the newscast, Iran held a similar drone drill where Russian forces were present. And now they're holding this drill tomorrow. This all comes amid the backdrop of what appears to be a very imminent Iran nuclear deal. That's right. It looks like in the coming days, perhaps weeks, this deal will indeed be signed, and it is even worse, if that's possible, than the 2015 incarnation of the Iran nuclear deal. It's coming, folks. Prepare. And as Iran refuses to take its foot off the gas, hey, they're pushing forward with attempted assassinations on U.S. soil of former Trump administration officials, author Salman Rushdie, drone drills, menacing Israel. They're pushing forward. They're not backing off as this deal looms. And yet the West is so desperate and showing such weakness in the face of Iranian aggression. It can only be a disaster, but that's what is coming. A disastrous Iran nuclear deal, part 2. We'll break that down on future episodes of the newscast in the coming days. You won't want to miss that. Until tomorrow, thanks so much for joining us. God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.